Got the ding.
All right, good morning. This Tuesday morning, Ted, and it is a beautiful Tuesday morning despite the fact Bitcoin's down a little bit to start the day, but nothing outside of normal movements as far as I can see.
Well, we're back to the same level we were on May 11th. So,
Yeah, it's holding, it's holding up, despite all this noise that we hear every day and that we talk about. Like I said, it's just noise. You're going to see this. Part of what happens is, people get bored because, the price action ranges for weeks and months, and, people expect this thing to move, every day and for it to go straight up, and it doesn't work that way.
no, it does not. Thankfully, in the long term, this tends to trend in an upward, or it's on an upward trajectory as rational minds, and I'll say, well, maybe rational. I mean, rational is relative, maybe. So what I'm trying to communicate is that I think as more and more people start to see what we're going to talk about happen in real time and start to get closer and closer to home, and that this is where the rubber meets the road in many cases, is that it's one thing to hear about places like Argentina and hear about hyperinflation and hear about these like astronomical interest rates and things like capital controls. Hear about that stuff and it's like, oh man, that's crazy. Hey, did you catch the game last night? And we're right back to as a nation, as a society, as a community. Like we as individuals live in a relatively small world physically, and until these things show up on the front door, it's hard for people to care. And I'm not judging here. I'm just pointing out reality. And that sometimes these things don't mean anything until they mean something for someone at the local level.
People, it's hard for people to really pay attention to anything until it affects their wallet. I mean, that includes U.S. politics too. And what we're going to talk about today is Argentina and why Bitcoin and crypto actually matter. This is not speculation. This isn't, opinion. This is people trying to survive in a country that has, for a very long time, made poor decisions and really has been struggling for a long time. I mean, here you see an article from Niraj, and he says, Argentina cracks down on crypto as inflation soars past 100%. And so what's interesting about this is I've got another article here that comes up, and they talk about Argentina's government raises key interest rate to 97%, okay, and compare that to the annual Bitcoin inflation rate on the other image, which we talked about yesterday, which is predictable. And let's pull up the Coin Bureau article here, and you've got somebody from Argentina explaining what's going on, and they say, I'm from Argentina, buying dollars outside the pittance allowed by the government is illegal. So that's not what we are using to buy bread either. The people selling bread don't know what crypto is. So yeah, you will use fiat for the last mile payments most of the time. However, crypto is being broadly used here. I know people who have been receiving 100% of their salaries in crypto for years now. Most of the people doing freelance work will resort to some type of cryptocurrency. Otherwise, when you get paid, automatically you lose 50% of the money. The banks, on behalf of the government, will take your USD and give you Argentinian pesos at half the real exchange rate. This is terrifying. I feel bad for the people of Argentina. When I was in Argentina in 2018, I lived there for 2 months. And in that 2-month period, the peso fell 40% in relation to the US dollar. So this is something that's been going on for a long time here. And I think what's interesting about this is, instead of doing the right things, okay, they've chosen to go with the IMF and crack down on crypto. It's just a microcosm of what we're seeing here in the United States, right? They want to, because the money's broken, instead of fixing the money, right, and doing austerity and making cuts and doing the hard things, every single government in Argentina continues to screw up. I mean, I think they a few years ago they issued 100-year loan, or 100-year bond, and I forget what happened with it, but it was ridiculous. It just they continue to make bad decisions, and it really hurts the people in Argentina. And so, what do the people do? They use crypto because they know that they can count on it, And I find it fascinating that this is happening in the real world. It's happening today, and don't think for a second that it can't happen here. We've got a lot of things here that isolate us from this kind of stuff, but I think you're going to see this happen all over the world as different currencies start to fail.
Yeah, it's. I don't need to reiterate or restate anything that you just said, other than or everything you just said makes sense to me. I think it'll make sense to more people as these things start to happen more and more. But this feels like it's a long way away. But what the things that are happening are having real world effect on people. What I'm trying to say is that the as other countries currencies start to, or they start to lose control of them, they're going to behave similarly, because because they don't really have much choice. If you ask me, they either do what they're doing in Argentina, meaning the Argentines, the folks in power, they either do what they're doing and they get to stay in power, and they get to benefit from the protections, in a manner of speaking, or they let it go and let everything collapse, and then somebody comes after them. There's pitchforks and torches in the street, and I mean, this isn't a good situation. I don't know that there's anything good about the situation. However, out of the ashes of catastrophe, and through the chaos of calamity, the people are starting to learn, because they have to. And I was talking a few moments ago about how these things don't really mean a lot to most people, which is not meant to sound judgy. It's just real life. Is that now that these things have showed up on the doorstep for the Argentinians, they're being forced to look for a solution or an alternative, instead of, thankfully, in other parts of the world, we get to see this thing coming, and we can make choices today ahead of time, if we're aware, and if we choose to do so. But circling back to the point is that this stuff is on the doorstep. And that other tweet that you had pulled up, where talking about how you get paid in dollars. This one right here is the most disturbing to me. Is that when you and we as Americans don't really understand this, if you ask my opinion. But if you get paid in crypto, then meaning the banks take when you swap it for dollars, because that's better, then the government takes your dollars and only gives you 50% back of worth of the local currency. I mean, this is just insane to me.
It is. Well, and I'll give you another example of something they do. This is they have capital controls there,
Yes.
which what we would do in the morning. And here's the other thing too. When I was in Buenos Aires, the credit cards don't work all the time, and not every place takes credit cards. Okay, and so you are in a situation where you have to use the peso. Well, you would go to the lines at the ATMs in the morning to get pesos out, and here's what it looks like. There's 20 or 30 people at the line, and you better pray to God that there's pesos in the ATM. And on top of that, they limit the amount of pesos you could take out. At the time, it was 2,000 pesos, okay? So you can take out 2,000 pesos a day, but there's a 10% fee when you take the pesos out. So so now you're at 1,800 pesos, okay? And so this is something that has affected the poor people of Argentina for a long time, and so they've adopted black markets. It's called the blue dollar, and they use, they've been using USD for a while. So if you are living in Argentina and you're getting paid in USD, that's a lot better than getting paid in the local currency. Now, take that to the next level. If you're working in Argentina, you would most likely rather be paid in crypto. All right. And so this is something that's helping people survive in a time where the country has essentially failed the people. And this is something that's going to start happening all over the world. I mean, you see what's going on in Turkey, you see what's going on in places like Nigeria, and this is something that, while we sit here, in our high throne, and most people don't even have any idea that this stuff is going on and think that it can't happen here, it's just a matter of time, right? And again, like we talked about yesterday, it's all relative, right? And the reason the US dollar is so strong is because relative to other countries' currencies, we're the reserve currency, and we're the cleanest shirt in the laundry basket, right? But that doesn't take away the fact that there is a better alternative to this, and that is Bitcoin and crypto. And I like this slide here because this tweet, because they're raising their interest rate to 97% as inflation soars. I mean, we have a hard time here being like, how can we plan for the future when they raise rates to 5.25% and then they raise rates to 5.5%, and everybody's freaking out? Imagine 97%. Now, I don't know that that's gonna happen, but I think you have to take this stuff seriously and then compare it to Bitcoin's inflation schedule, which we all know, is predictable, is not changeable by human beings. These governments can't come in and change the inflation schedule of Bitcoin. And the other interesting thing here is, the IMF made a condition of, International Monetary Fund, said they give a loan to Argentina, but they have to ban crypto. So Argentina bans payment apps from offering Bitcoin to customers. All right. Again, and we talk about this a lot. This is the governments want to control. All right. They want to control people, and that's. I mean, that shouldn't be conspiracy. That it just is what it is, right? That if they can't control people, they lose power, and so they're going to do everything they can to keep that power. Well, I'm personally in favor of the individual having power over their own financial future. And if you're in Argentina, Bitcoin and crypto is the real world example of how you can do that. If you would have, in 2018 when I was there, I think Bitcoin, we had just come off of, our big first run up to 20,000, and I was there in the summer. So I think Bitcoin was trading, I don't know, let's just say 10, 11,000. But I think it was 8,000. But if you would have taken your pesos or your dollars when you're in Argentina and purchased Bitcoin, and you'd be sitting here, you would have been able to save the purchasing power of your money and be sitting on Bitcoin that is tripled in value over 4 or 5 year period. So again, this is just a real world example of why this stuff matters and why it's good for people to kind of pay attention to this, even though you think it can't happen in some of these more developed countries. I mean, Argentina, they had all kinds of resources, and I forget the story at what point I really knew it, but they basically outsourced everything. Okay, and doesn't that sound familiar, right? The government basically sold out the country, and you're seeing the results of that. And it's been corrupt for many years. There's always turmoil, but on the bright side of that, there is an option for people down there, albeit the government's kind of trying to be restrictive, but that just makes sense. That's what they're all going to try to do. I mean, you see it here with the SEC yesterday. They came out and said it's perfectly reasonable for them to take 15 to 20 years to decide crypto laws. And that's not only laughable, it's dangerous. This industry is innovating at breakneck speed, and the SEC wants to take 15 to 20 years to figure it out. Like, I'm sorry, that's just not possible. It's not going to wait for the SEC. And so if it doesn't happen in the United States, it's going to happen somewhere else.
Yeah, but it's okay for the SEC to wait 20 years to do this, or 15 years or whatever. But it's also okay for the ECC to cherry pick and pick winners with regard to how they enforce what they call. So we're going to take our time making the rules, and we're not going to be clear on the rules, but we're going to pick some rule to enforce over here and go after Kraken, for example, and say you can't have a staking program. Or we're going to go after Coinbase and we're going to say that you're selling securities, but we're not going to be clear on. What does this do? It drives innovation offshore, and it creates the chaos creates opportunity. So there are just this idea, or this, I think that it still doesn't register with the every person that the rest of the world is chomping at the bit to innovate and have and develop like this appetite for technology and prosperity more than anything else is very strong still, no matter what you read in the news, no matter what conflict of the day, no matter what horrible regime is, oppressing people. There's still an order of magnitude more people that are collaborating, and because of the internet, and they're working towards, and the other places around the world, like the UAE, United Arab Emirates, and another interesting thing that's happening on June 1st. Interesting timing. Yellen's saying that Treasury's going to run out of cash on the 1st, and this is the debt ceiling showdown that's going to happen. Gosh, I mean, the only thing I would change about the political theater in this country is I would charge admission. Imagine we could fix the debt ceiling problem. We could fix the deficits if we just charged people to participate and watch the theatrics in the show, the dog and pony show. But anyway, commentary aside, what I'm trying to communicate is that Hong Kong's going to come online in a manner of speaking. There's a large appetite there. Their regulatory apparatus I guess they have an IQ above room temperature, perhaps, and they understand that they better accommodate this, because it's coming to the rest of the world at a scale that is unstoppable. It's like trying to stand up against an avalanche, because it is coming. And
and imagine if you're in one of these countries that's going through what's happening in Argentina. So what do? Your bank's going to take half the purchasing power of your money. So your option then is you have to become your own bank, and you do that by purchasing Bitcoin, and you're through. They're going to try everything they can to ban these payments and all this stuff, but that's it's not the problem. And what I don't like, and what scares me, is you starting to see these countries that have gotten themselves in a problem frame crypto as the problem. And the people that haven't paid attention to this are going to look at this and say, oh yeah, crypto's the problem, we just need to ban that and everything will be fine. No, that's not the case, right? That if you pay attention at all, you understand that the problem is reckless spending and the continued debasement of the currency. All these governments do the same thing. That they print money from their central bank digital currencies. They promise the world to get votes, and it happens time and time again. And every time they do that, they debase the value of their local currency. And again, we have the, privilege of being the world reserve currency. So a lot of people will argue that that's not going to happen here, and the U.S. isn't ever going to default, and people are just going to accept the dollar forever. And I think there's a long period of time where that probably still is the case. But at some point, it's going to be prudent, and I believe that point is now, to opt out of this system, and for many reasons other than the obvious ones, right? I mean, there's a lot of moral and ethical reasons to opt out of this system. I mean, you look at what the United States does and has done all over the world for the past 20 or 30 or 40 years. I mean, I don't believe in endless wars all over. I don't believe in, where my tax dollars go. I don't believe sending money to fight wars all over the world is a prudent use of my labor, right? Like, this stuff is very deep, and it goes more than the surface level here when we talk about money and what these governments do and how this all works. I mean, we can get into the ethical aspect of Bitcoin and how it relates to central bank digital currency, or I'm sorry, central bank. I'm so used to talking about CBDCs, central bank currencies, and the difference between the two. If you live in a hard money system where you can't just print money out of nowhere, it makes it very, very hard to fight endless wars, right? Like, you just can't decide all of a sudden we're going to print $2 trillion and, build, and give 800 million of it to the military to go out and fight endless wars. I mean, and this is something that happens too with countries. They continue to debase their money. They spread their armies all over the world. And at some point, the money that the governments are printing becomes worthless. And if you're fighting for that country, you're getting paid to do so. And I would argue that once you get stopped getting paid, it makes it really hard to continue to fight, right? And so we've got soldiers that are based all over the world that are getting paid in US dollars. If the US dollar became worthless, what is their incentive to stay 3,000 miles away from home fighting a war that has no purpose?
That's the $31 trillion question. Given
It
leveraging,
is. No, and
leveraging the
it's
current situation with the debt, the national debt. Anyway, the one thing that came to mind while you were describing, or during what you were describing, is that we we this the debasement thing is a good. There's a good joke that I heard a while back. It says, "How come Grandma couldn't find her dollars?" And the answer is because they were in debasement.
no, I mean it's funny, but it's true. I mean, if you talk to older people in your life, right? And I think this is something we as a society have failed miserably at. And you talk to somebody that's 80 years old, they're going to remember times where they didn't trust the banks. They kept money in gold in buckets and buried them outside the house, and they lived through the Depression, and they saw this stuff happen in the United States. And we if you're 20 years old through 50 years old, you haven't seen any of that, right? Like we were born in a time, the sweet spot of when we went off the gold standard in this fiat system that we're currently living in. That was the boom time, right? These things aren't designed to last forever, and the powers that be know that. There's a lifespan for fiat currency, and these things last anywhere from 70 to 80 to 100 years, and we're right there with the US dollar, and you're starting to see that play out. And I think it's only going to be more of the same until it just can't keep going, right? And that's where it's important to realize that, okay, yeah, maybe the United States isn't going to be in the situation Argentina is for a long time. Could happen next week. I have no idea, right? And so, but what do? Well, the answer is you take some of your purchasing power that you store in US dollars and you convert that to a hard asset like Bitcoin. And that protects your purchasing power, whatever the currency is in the future. Bitcoin is the denominator. You can exchange it for whatever currency you want, right? Whatever we end up deciding to use, or whatever Argentina does. If you're a resident of Argentina and you own Bitcoin and they implement a new currency, which they'll do, they'll try to, like I said yesterday, they'll do everything wrong first before they do the right thing. You are fine. You are protected. Now you have the volatility of Bitcoin, but in the face of 97% interest rates and continued debasement of your money, 40 to 50% debasement of your money in a 2-month period, the volatility of Bitcoin is nothing. And as the network grows, that volatility is going to continue to decrease.
We talk a lot about purchasing power preservation here. And I think the example that you made earlier about being in Argentina in 2018, and if you had taken some of your fiat money at the time and swapped it for Bitcoin and held that over the last 4 years, 5 years, that you would have preserved, like there would have been all of the volatility. So this is the hang up currently in the minds of many, is that but the price changes. Okay, I sound like a jerk there because I feel like a jerk because I've heard this so many times from very smart people, and most of them here in the United States, where we're insulated from a lot of this crap. But what I'm driving toward here is that there's really no better example of purchasing power preservation than the one you made, where if you had and the example is very salient and poignant and really hit the mark for me personally, of understanding things that other people way smarter than me say, like Michael Saylor, who's way wealthier than all of us, and understands and has experienced capital controls and not being able to get significant money out of a country like Argentina, and not being able to take things out of it because the government's like, oh, sorry, you're not allowed to do that. Oh, you made a bunch of money here in our country. Well, guess what? It stays because we're the government and we make the rules and we're in power. What are you going to do about it, Michael Saylor? But just to really like drive this point home, the volatility of Bitcoin's price in whatever you're pricing it in doesn't matter necessarily. But what does matter is that if you were suffering in 2018 in Argentina, and you made a bold choice and said, you know what, I'm gonna store some of my purchasing power in this other hard money asset. The thing that I'm trying to communicate here is that fiat money is not the place to store your purchasing power, because fiat money gets debased. It is what it is. It happens, and it's going to continue to happen. No one is going to stop this from happening.
The hard part is, though, Ted, is that people that, you have to take a step back and remember, right now, even in the United States, it's a luxury to own Bitcoin, right? It really is, because people are trying to survive on a day-to-day basis. So I understand that, putting your money into an asset like Bitcoin is scary, and when you have to survive day to day, right? And it's not currently used and adopted all over the world. But the case in Argentina is something that I think everybody should think about and look at, because the point that I want to make is, yes, there's volatility in Bitcoin, but in the face of something like what's happening in Argentina, that volatility is nothing compared to the fact, like Michael Saylor talks about, you are guaranteed to lose X percentage of purchasing power by holding dollars, and that's in the US, okay, because of inflation. If you're in a place like Argentina, where inflation has just run rampant and you're losing 50% of your purchasing power just by converting dollars to pesos, this is a huge problem. And to where you start to see that the people have said in this tweet that, look, I'm just pay me in crypto, because I don't want to deal with this. And because what's funny about it is, we can say, well, yeah, volatility, but when you look at the situation of Argentina, the volatility doesn't matter, because what's happening there is way worse than any volatility in Bitcoin and crypto. And so we look at this from a first world problem in the United States. And again, you should be very conscious. If you have the money to invest in Bitcoin and crypto, you're doing very well, because a lot of people on this planet are struggling to live day to day. Okay, and when you live in a place like Argentina, what's happening there makes it even harder, because your labor, what you're rewarded, and we talk about this all the time, their time and energy and labor is rewarded in pesos, and those pesos are worthless. Okay, that essentially, right? And this is a problem directly related to central bank policies and how these governments use it. And you've got to remember, these central banks aren't just in the United States; they're all over the world. I mean, this is truthfully, that's the problem, right? That's what allowed all these people, these groups, small groups of people that have all this power, supposedly have been able to accumulate that playing the central bank game. Okay, and so what Bitcoin does is it allows you to opt out of that and retain purchasing power for yourself. And again, we have to understand that if you're trying to eat, right, and you work 10 hours a day, you have a family, and you're barely making it, I understand that listening to us talk about you should use Bitcoin for X, Y, and Z is probably like, all right, even though I conceptually understand it, it's not practical. Well, here's an example in Argentina where they are opting into this, right? And it is helping people. And so all the big brains that talk about there's no use case, or what's it good for, or here's an example of what it's good for, and this stuff is going to happen and is happening all over the world. And I think it's just a matter of time before people start to understand what's happening, because they don't teach you this stuff in school. You're not you don't have a class on central bank currencies and the central bank system, right? Like, what are you taught about money in high school? Essentially nothing, right? You might, if you go to a good school, learn how to write a check, right? But this stuff, what you're taught is a set of skills sometimes to go out, enter the labor force, work for 40 years, pay taxes, and die. That's what we're taught. We're not taught about how this works. We're not taught about alternatives. We're not taught about why we should use dollars over gold, or why we went off the gold standard, or any of that stuff. But in real life, right now, you're witnessing in Argentina the use case for Bitcoin and crypto, a use case for Bitcoin and crypto. I think there's many, but this is one of them, and it's helping people survive what's, in no lesser words, a flat out crisis.
Yeah, that tweet right there, buying dollars outside. So what they're saying is that they're allowed to have a certain number of dollars, but it's not enough. It's more of just what the government's trying to be seen as we're giving you permission, citizens, and I mean, I look at this and I start to short circuit because it seems insane, but I think you made an excellent point of that they are leaning heavily on Bitcoin in this case, and it is delivering. Bitcoin is doing the thing. It's literally enabling people to survive. And that's not a great story for the mainstream media, and I don't care about that. But what I care about is that there's evidence of real world use case for a decentralized, open, hard money monetary network that anyone on earth can participate in, and it's as easy as using your favorite smartphone app if you have a smartphone. Anyone who can use a smartphone.
Yeah, apparently though they're banning the apps in Argentina, and this is a problem, right, with these governments. Okay, and
Fair.
you don't need the apps to do this. Bitcoin can be transaction peer to peer, without an app. Right, like there's this. But a point I want to make too, what you'll notice here is these people aren't opting to use gold. They're not opting to use silver. They're opting in the case of dollars. They're not opting to use dollars because the dollars in their banks will get 50% haircuts when they convert to pesos. They're opting for crypto, right? And that just shows you that despite all the other things that you hear about it, this is the thing people are choosing because it's the thing that works.
That's right, and the rubber meets the road in real life when it comes down to people that they're not choosing to be in these situations, but they're in a situation where they have to choose something. And your point about they're not choosing dollars for the reasons you just explained. They're not choosing gold and silver because those can be confiscated. What are you going to do? You're going to hide them in your body cavity. I mean, let's be real. The idea can be like crypto technically, but your seed phrase can be transported in your mind. And what are they going to do? They're going to open your head up and try to steal it from you. I mean, this is really powerful stuff because we live in a world where there are corrupt institutions and people that are, I don't know what it's like, so I'm going to take a few guesses here, but I imagine that in many situations there are many people that are a part of the corrupt apparatus that are terrified of what happens if they push back and choose not to obey what they're being told to do. Now, that's not an excuse, I'm just saying, but I mean, this isn't a good. I don't even have to go any further with that. What I'm trying to communicate here is that it's not a good situation, and crypto does have this real world use case is a perfect example of why these things were created, in my opinion.
Well, it's offering people an exit, and it's offering people a solution to a problem. I wrote an article a while back. It's Bitcoin's a solution to a problem you don't know you have. Right, and it was in relation to inflation, but also in relation to, if you look at what's actually happening is that, again, the IMF is conditioning a loan based off the Argentinian government cracking down on crypto use. And so when we say that, the money is about controlling people, right? That's what we mean, right? And so you might be in a position where there's obviously probably there are members of, and you can't take the other thing we can't do, and we have a tendency to do this, we say Argentinian government. There are a lot of probably really good people in the Argentinian government that support Bitcoin and crypto, right? And I know there are. I've seen, one of the candidates I think running is a Bitcoin proponent. And so you're starting to see where this is going to become more and more of an issue, and it's going to get louder and louder across the world on the main stage, because people are starting to realize what's going on, right? And it's a symptom. What's happening in Argentina is the result of central bank policies. It's not a result of Bitcoin and crypto. Bitcoin and crypto is a solution to these problems, right? And you're starting to see more and more people wake up to that. And in the United States, the faster we can do that, the better. That's why what's happening with the SEC and the current administration, and look, this isn't Republican or Democrat or not, but the current administration is full of criminals. That's not Josh saying that. Like, look at what came out yesterday. I mean, they're using our own system to interfere in elections. Like, this is bad stuff. I mean, this is third world country stuff, and it's happening in the United States. And you can put blinders on and act like that's not happening because you identify as party X or party Y. But if you look at what's happening, it is happening. It's happening. It's been happening for the past 5-6 years at a very high level, right? And so you have to kind of pay attention to say, okay, our highest level of government is acting like a third world country. What comes next, right? You think they're going to be honest with you about the money and what they're doing with the money? There's no way in hell. They're just not going to do it. And so you have to understand, as an individual, you got a limited amount of time, in my opinion, to exit out of this system before they become onerous and overbearing and make it harder for you to do that. And they're going to. I mean, they just are. I'd like to think that we live in a world in a country where they respect individuals, and actually the Constitution and our laws say they should, but they apparently have no consideration for those, right? But an individual can own and trade in whatever currency they want, right? And so I think it's important to pay attention to. I think it's important to understand what's happening here and also what's happening in the rest of the world, and where Bitcoin and crypto can come in when the system ultimately does fail, right? And I'm not saying that happens tomorrow. It might happen in 10 years. It might happen in 50 years, again. But this is a part of what we talk about, taking a percentage of your savings and money you don't need to live on a day-to-day basis and exiting and opting out of the fiat system. Now, you can always opt back in. It's not like once you go to Bitcoin, you can't sell it if you need to. I mean, that's, I think people struggle with this like hodl mentality that you have to, look, you got to live, right? And that there's no way around it. But it's like buying gold or silver too. And another thing, still to this day, I talk to people about Bitcoin and they're like, well, can I sell it if I need to? And I kind of take a step back and I got to go, okay, it's new. Well, it's one of the most liquid. Bitcoin is the most liquid, asset in cryptocurrency. Yes, you can sell Bitcoin at any point you want, back into dollars or back into pesos or back into yuan or back into whatever currency you want. The point is to eliminate some of the counterparty risk in the banks in the traditional system and keep your purchasing power, whatever your savings are, in something that over time is going to retain that purchasing power.
Excellent. And I think more and more people, we say it all the time here, one mind and one crypto wallet at a time, people are going to wake up, or they're starting to wake up globally. And this is magic. The Other thing I wanted to talk about real quick, circling back to this Argentinian situation. Michael Saylor has talked many, many times about Bitcoin being hope. And he even went so far as to buy the domain hope.com on the open internets. And if you go to hope.com, you can read about, look, just go there, hope.com. I endorse this message. And well, that's one thing I'm willing to endorse openly and you can learn anything and everything you ever wanted to know about Bitcoin, hard money. There's so much commentary and there's so many voices here, so many perspectives, and this is the most important thing I want to try and communicate by talking about this website and this idea of Bitcoin being hope, is that you don't have to take my word for it. You don't have to take Josh's word for it. You can independently consume some information from almost every perspective, or a representation of almost every perspective, and make your own decision about like whether or not this is useful to you or not. And at the end of the day, if it is, great. If it isn't, fantastic. You can move on to something else. We can keep doing our thing and everybody's happy and we live our lives. And the thing that I've heard, or the thing I want to reiterate, is if you are so inclined and want to understand the real world impact of things like capital controls, the things that the Argentinians are doing to their people, the government that is, then you can use this really cool thing called internet search, and you can search for some videos or podcasts of Michael Saylor talking about the challenges that he's had personally, but also the reason I harp about Saylor is that he's able to take these really complex topics and communicate them relatively clearly and in a sequence that gives you the best chance of developing your own understanding. And I've benefited personally from listening to this man talk from his perspective. He has a very unique vantage point, having, in his business career, has given him the opportunity to see things that a lot of us don't have access to. And I think that's valuable. And he talks openly about it. So anyway, there's Bitcoin or crypto in general, but specifically, I'll harp on Bitcoin for a second. Hope.com, you can consume and feast upon all these different perspectives, come to your own conclusions, and we'll keep doing our thing here and you keep doing your thing there, wherever you are. And we'll opt out and hope for a better world at the end of the day.
Well, yeah, this is a great resource. And, what you got to remember with anything is you've always got to look at the individual who's talking, look at their perspective. Michael Saylor owns an absolute metric ton of Bitcoin. Okay. And so he's very Bitcoin focused, Bitcoin heavy. He's one of the guys that does a really good job though, saying, look, I don't know if there's going to be value in other cryptocurrencies. He takes it with, but he's not, you got to remember, this guy's not going to, he's got $2 billion worth of Bitcoin. He's not going to come out and say, I think Ethereum's great, but that being said, you can make a decision for yourself. And this is a great website. He's a great person to listen to about Bitcoin. And I think they do a really good job. So with that being said, we'll wrap it up there for today. As always, do your own research. Nothing Ted or I say is financial, accounting, or legal advice. We want to help people understand crypto, why it's important. And with that being said, if you enter these markets, you're doing so at your own risk. And we'll see you tomorrow.